Lucille Clifton, the poet laureatist of the state of Maryland, said that it's the life thing in us that will not let us die. That even in deaf hands we fold up the fingers and call them greens and grow on them. This poem by Lucille Clifton was introduced to me by a very wonderful, quiet, dedicated sister who died in 1986 named Geraldine Wilson. And when I originally started doing this research, I had Geraldine in mind, who always talked about the importance of us going back and looking at that which we once knew and what we seem to be giving up, as she talked about struggling to hold on to our children and bringing our children into what she thought was the rightful position. Geraldine was a wonderful sister. And I guess when I think about those who've gone on, I think about the strength of some of our sisters. That is just a moment away that we can reflect on them and sort of gain their wisdom and their knowledge. In the volume that I have on the Black woman, Geraldine has the last concluding article in that book. And the article is called The Self-Actualization of Black Women. And in that article, she says that we must consider, reflect, and evaluate who we are and who we want to become. She says that we have heard who the Europeans want us to become, and we know their full-scale effort to destroy the very fiber of our existence at a national and an international level. And that many of us, as a consequence of this concerted effort to make us somebody other than who we are, hold on to false copies of our womanhood and our manhood. And many times we are afraid to let that false copy go because we don't think that we have anything to put in its place, not knowing or realizing that our strength, that the wisdom of our return is but a moment away in the knowledge of our foremothers, in the very basic fiber of their lives, and in the values and the ideas of an African culture. And this is not to suggest that our forefathers were not wise, but rather that knowledge, understanding come from two great forces in the universe, from both male and female. And it is males who make the world clear from their own perspective, and it is females who make the world clear from their perspective. And that the truth is the blending of the two in the ever-evolving dialectic of becoming. When knowledge, and that is when male and female is out of balance, the world is out of balance, and the children suffer. They become confused and deviant in their behavior. And needless to say, it is from adults, and that is from male and female, that they learn this aberrant behavior. And so that if our children are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, it's because their elders are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. This paper brings a perspective on African American culture and victorious struggle from the female's perspective of reality. From the perspective of women such as Fannie Lou Hamer, who said that I stand on the truth. From Harriet Tubman, who through her behavior and her deeds told us that nobody can do anything to black women when their minds are made up. And who brought 300 Africans to freedom, traveling by the light of the moon and the stars. And from Sojourner Truth, who took the name, So My Journey is a Movement on Truth. And who said to the world that I have plowed, I have worked as hard as any man, had 13 babies, and nobody heard my cry but Jesus. And aren't I a woman? And from Ella Baker, the theorist, the statistician, and the organizer of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, who at the age of 53 decided that I still have work to do. And many of us who have not barely reached 40 are saying that I am tired and I've worked hard enough and I'm now ready to retire. And it comes from Mary McLeod Bethune, who built a school with $1.39 and the faith that she could do anything but fail, and who on her last will and testimony they said, "What do you want to leave?" And she sat down and she said that I leave you love, and I leave you a clear vision of what you must do for the children. And from Ida B. Wells Barnett, the little dynamo who stood less than 5 feet tall and who nearly single-handedly called the world's attention to the lynching of black men, and I understood that she packed her own gun and would use it. And from ordinary black women who through their lives and their examples of truth, of justice and righteousness has given us a message of what we must do. Sanufu, return and fetch that which we have left behind. These ordinary women who knew the importance of raising their children in the way of righteousness, women who made sure that their children were fed and clothed before they were. And as I look at some mothers today, I think that they don't understand that. I see mothers who look better than their children. And in a very real African traditional sense, that's not possible. Mothers may not have, but your children must always look like they've got something. Women who knew that their mothers and their mothers' mothers were the center of African life, and that as a people we can only become righteous if we are raised by righteous women. Women who knew what it meant to be the moral standards of the community, and who were the final source of correctness in the community, who were the embodiment of the highest principle of Kemetic Egyptian morality, the principle of Mayat, the principle of truth, of justice and righteousness. And how interesting that the very essence of Kemetic life is in the image of a woman. And on the final day of judgment, one's heart, one's very essence must be weighed no heavier than the feather of Mayat, this woman who is the final judgment of whether or not you have led a moral and correct life. Sheikh Anta Diop, in his book, The Cultural Unity of Black Africa, tells us that no other people give women the centrality in culture that Africa give women. And after all, Africa is called the motherland, not the fatherland. And Africans say that women make it sweet. And when all other fail, and men cannot decide what is valid, what they ought to do, they say, bring the women. And they say, women, make it sweet. Tell us what we ought to be doing. The centrality of women in culture can also be seen in ancient Kemet goddesses, such as the goddess Nut, who is so awesome, so powerful, that she swallows the sun Ra in the evening and gives birth to it in the morning. And it was Aset, Isis as you might know, who repairs the dismembered body of her husband Osiris, who then later becomes the resurrected God, thanks to Aset. Because had she not gone around the world looking for the pieces of his body, and then after having not been able to find them in her anguish, only like a woman could, begin to cry. Cried so hard that she began to cause the Nile River to flood. And it is her tears that cause for the inundation every year. So you see, you're talking about a mighty woman who can cause the Nile River to flood every year to fertilize the land that goes on to bring life into the Nile Valley. The centrality of women can also be seen in the goddess Hathor, the nurturing goddess. And oftentimes in the pictures you will see the pharaoh nursing from the breast the wisdom of Hathor. She is the cosmic source of life. And Theophile Obanga, in his book, Ancient Egypt and Black Africa, tells us, and I quote, before the universal came into being, the original source of all life was already both male and female, end quote. He further made the need to identify the female principle in divine action was vital to the people of Kemet. The divine world was based on the complementarity of the sexes, which was forever becoming, forever evolving, the process of becoming and returning to the source. And as we move away from our center, as we have changed this complementarity of male and female, life has become compartmentalized. The religious is separated from the political, the economic from the sacred, the physical from the spiritual, the law from the practice, male from female. And it is the imbalance in the creative force of becoming, the divine principle of male and female, that explains much of our present conditions. Because a house divided cannot stand. We, buying into somebody else's existential basis of reality, have divided ourselves on male and female. We've let people come into the house and say women should not have that much power, not realizing that from an African perspective, before existence even came into an existence, there was male and female. So what are the conditions? What I call a search for core black culture. What happens to a people's character? What happens to a people's personality who is forcefully snatched from its existential basis and placed in a culture that is diametrically opposed to the very core of their own character? What happens when you're placed in a culture that hates women and sees women as a commodity to be bought and sold? You can't see a TV commercial in this country unless you've got a woman in front of there, barely clothed, looking like she can't barely think for herself, selling a commodity. Analysis on this basis is often marred by a lack of knowledge about core black culture, the core value system that has guided the lives of Africans in the diaspora. Research often ignores the unity among cultures of continental Africa, including ancient Egypt and Africa-America. You see, in some kind of way, we have bought into people's position that Africa is so diversified that you can't see any unity. That's why we need to read something like Diop, where he talks about the culture unity of black Africa, including Egypt. And then the question is, what happens to us when we are brought over here? And we're not just like tops, and we didn't just grow. We came here intact with some basic values. And you see, your values are in your head. You may not be able to bring over the physical objects, but how I ought to treat each other, what I ought to be doing, the respect for elders, and all of that is in your head. So we know more about the values and the belief systems of Western society than we know about Africa. In fact, many Western scholars have even questioned whether Africa had a valid belief system and would deny that Egypt is in Africa in the first place. And so what they have done is to take Egypt, which is on the continent of Africa, and place it in some concept that they've made up called the Middle East. And we have bought into the concept, and we go around calling Egypt in the Middle East. And Diop says, until you put Egypt in the center of what is Africa, your whole history is going to remain suspended out there in air. buying something that's convenient for somebody else's existential basis rather than our own existential basis. And they've taken our belief system and called it superstition. Call it mumbo jumbo. Call it whatever than being valid in its own. It's cultural imperialism, it's ethnocentrism, or whatever other word you want to use in terms of how somebody has looked at us, become the anthropologist, the authority on culture, and then give it back to us. We were saying earlier, where is the jungle in Africa? I have never seen a jungle in Africa, but we brought the Tarzan mentality about Africa. In addition, when Egypt is discussed, more attention is paid to individuals, specifically to the pharaohs, than to the culture. That is, people don't dwell on the ideas, the values, and the beliefs of ancient Egyptian society. In the past decade, however, there has been a significant increase in the number of African American scholars who are making the unity among African cultures worldwide known. And some of them have already been here in this program, talking to you, talking to the students, talking to the faculty. But people like Milana Karenga, people like Donna Marimba Richards Ani, like Molefi Asante, like Linda James Myers, like Wade Nobles, like John Henry Clark, like Sister Raketi Amen Jones and Yosef Ben Johanna and Nzinga Warfield Copped and Ivan Van Sertima, have been doing the kinds of research in terms of reconstructing our own history and letting us know who we are as a people and what we have done and what we can continue to do. And in seeking to understand the character of African Americans, we've tended to pay more attention to the devastating outcomes of living in a society that denies a people its humanity, often missing that which explains the group's ability to thrive and to survive. And likewise, we have done little to study the character and the personality of groups and individuals who would invade another country, steal hundreds of millions of its people, hold them in dungeons, which they call slave castles, chain them together like cattle, rape their children, castrate their men, sell families away from each other, lynch them, and then create a social science whose theories say that enslaved Africans who try to escape to freedom suffer from major psychological disorders. Fail to study a group of people who told us that the enslavers were the good guys. We have not studied those people who write high ideals, but whose behavior have never lived up to the morals that they profess. And Obenga says that in modern society, the basis of continuing conflict is that the moral thought is disseminated only as an ideal, never as pragmatism. The material base of Western society works against the development of true religiosity, true spirituality, and true morality, he says. What must be the psychological state of these people? What kinds of disorders must exist among them? What deviant behavior can be seen in the character of these people? We know the deviant behavior of African Americans because we make our living talking about that. But nobody hardly pays any attention to the deviant behavior. And I think that the book that Marimba Ali has just finished Which talks about the character, at least in terms of some scientific ways that they think. But we need to start, as psychologists, need to start looking at the personality, just as we look at the personality of African Americans. So it's time for researchers to begin a systematic study of the character of those people who rape the world. Define nearly 90% of the world as less than human, because they're making up less than 15% of the world's population. We must seek to understand those people who would divide the continent of Africa among themselves, colonize its people, confiscate all of its natural resources, slaughter millions of Africans in the name of white supremacy, and say that we ought to be happy. We will continue to miss the humanity and the alternative value system established by African Americans if we do not systematically study those who have oppressed the world. And as soon as you start systematically studying them, you will lose your jobs. So you must be prepared for that. You will be attacked. You must be prepared for that. It was Malcolm X's keen analysis of white America that frightened them and so revered him to African Americans. As social scientists, we have not done what Malcolm did. We have been afraid to adventure beyond the narrow confines of Western morality. We have nearly always studied the oppressed because our training tells us the oppressed is sick and need to be analyzed in order to make them whole. That's where we are right now today, as they're coming in with all of these things about our children. Your comments were so well taken today, Brother Oscar. Come in with all of these things. Rather than to study the oppressor and the systems that they have designed to keep us in certain kinds of positions. And further, we worry about who will publish our research findings if we study white America. Who would hire us? Who will give us tenure? And as we approach the 21st century, we, the descendants of millions of Africans who sacrificed for us to be here, must step beyond the narrow confines of Western science and thought. We must establish research agendas that liberate the lives of African people worldwide. And those of us in the United States know the Western culture better than any other African. We have lived with them, raised their children, cleaned their house, bore their children who they have abandoned. The research questions that we raise must go beyond the alleged low self-esteem, self-hatred of black people. We must begin to look at the vast majority of Africans in the diaspora who have managed to hold on to their core culture, who manage their lives without much fanfare, who continue to create the only, quote, true American culture, although they are never given credit for doing so. And that is, whatever you think is American, we must look to African Americans for its authenticity. We must look at the spiritual, look at the blues, look at jazz, look at rap, look at Martin dance, look at tap dance, look at the Charleston, the cakewalk, jitterbug, hustler, electric slide, whatever. We must raise research questions that begin to explain how an oppressed people can raise in its midst of oppression a David Walker, an Anna Julia Cooper, a Henry Highland Garnett, a Harriet Tubman, a Booker T. Washington, a Ida B. Wells Barnett, a Denmark Vesey, a Mary Church Terrell, a Martin Delaney, a W.B. Du Bois, a Mary McLeod Bethune, a Paul Robeson, a Fannie Lou Hamer, or a Marcus Garvey. These individuals are no accidents. They grew up and out of an African core. They were endowed with a character and a personality by their parents, by relatives and friends, living in the most devastating conditions. And yet, they have given the world individuals who are profound philosophical writers and impeccable in their behavior. And what is the core culture of African Americans that produce inventors like Elijah McCoy, the real McCoy, like Madam C.J. Walker, and the great athletes that go back to the first 10 original winners of the Kentucky Derby, to the boxers and the track players and the baseball players and the basketball players? What is it? And I would suggest to you that much of the answer must turn to the early socialization of African Americans. We must return to the source to fetch that which we left behind. We must reconstruct that past. We must know the values we were taught as African American children. And how do we see those values in behavior? And what must we do to reestablish those values in the lives of our children today? What modalities and paradigms grow out of the value systems of Africans living in the diaspora? And how can we take what we know from living in the belly of the beast and develop theory and research appropriate for all of Africa? So what is this foundation, this African American Culture Foundation? I suggest to you that it is based on a foundation of Kemetic values. Mayat is the foundation of both the natural and social order of ancient Kemet society. It is the spirit and the method of organizing and conducting relationships in society. Mayat is truth, it's justice, it's righteousness, which becomes real only in personal and social practice. John Blassingame, in his book on the slave community, tells us that it was the enslaved Africans who humanized the South. And I never thought about it. I never thought that when you go south, or you used to go south, everybody would speak to each other. Good morning, how you doing? He said it was the enslaved Africans who taught white people how to be polite. Even in their enslavement, they were able to do that. Taught them how to speak to each other. He said it was the enslaved Africa who slowed down the South. Slow down, boss. Don't move. Sit down. Relax. How were they able to do that? I would suggest that they were able to do that because many whites, and we haven't even looked at the implications of that, but many whites were raised, because they tell us that, were raised by black mothers. What does it mean to be nursed by a black woman? And when we read about the enslavement of Africans, we learn that African women were wet nurses. What does that mean? They're telling us today that there's a bonding that takes place. And that a baby don't know that this woman that's giving me this milk is not my mother. And so at some point there was an ad in the paper in the 19th century where this white father has taken out this ad saying we must get our children away from these Negro women because they're speaking just like them. So Blassingame said it was the enslaved Africans that gave the people in the South their dialect. How y'all doing? I mean, is there something in the air in the South that make you talk different than people in the North? They were raised by these black women. So they had many of the beliefs that these women had, because if she was going to put something around her baby's neck to ward off whatever, she'd also put it around the white baby's neck. We need to study that. E. Franklin Frazier talks about how these black women love taking care of these white babies. And we know about that. But we don't know about the consequences of these white babies being raised and and nursed by black women. And so in this process, these women, these African women who were raising these children, passed on the values and the behaviors to them. Let me very briefly take a short journey into some of these values of these women, some of the ideas and the beliefs and the behaviors of our great-grandmothers and our grandmothers, and for some of us, if we're old enough, for our mothers, to see what they tell us about how they socialize their children. What do these women tell us that we must do? And what values did they teach? And can we look at the way that black women raise their children and see what we must do for our own children? Because if children are not properly socialized, we will not leave descendants who will honor our memory and keep us alive. When we no longer call the ancestors' name, the culture dies, and we find ourselves in a similar situation that the ancient Egyptians of Kemet found themselves in thousands of years ago. And in Maulana Karenga's book, The Hosea, which is a compilation of the sacred writings of ancient Egypt, this is what our ancestors said when they had been invaded and people had started to take over. This is what they said. They said, "Behold now, how greatly the people have changed. One who once did not sleep even on a box now owns a bed. And those who once owned robes are now in rags. And those who once did not weave for themselves now own fine linen. And those who knew nothing of God now make offerings to him with the incense of others." End quote. And although things look bleak in this book of transformation written thousands of years ago, the ancient Kemites go on to say that Ma'at, righteousness and order, will return to its place, and Esphet, evil and chaos, will be driven away. And they talk about a king coming from the south named Amen, who will vindicate Egypt, born of a Nubian woman. We cannot let our children forget their ancestors. Cannot let them forget those who lie on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, whose names we will never know. We must remember, lest our children will never know. I would like to talk a little bit about this research that I've been doing, where I've been interviewing older black women about their mothers. This has been going on since 1987. We have interviewed more than 100 women over the age of 65 about their mothers. And we asked them, "Tell me about your mother. How would you characterize her? What values did your mother give you? What sayings or proverbs did she use? What songs did she sing? What foods did she cook? What home remedies did she use when you were sick? And then what did you tell your children when you raised them?" And when we say, how would you characterize them, the question of character gets at the very core of personality and the behavior of these older women. The question of value is pivotal in any discussion of culture. It is central to the culture, suggesting that that which propels people to action is the values that they believe in. And proverbs are important because we learn that Proverbs in Zingan Warfield Copper tells us is the daughter of experiences. They tell us how we should behave. The Proverbs focus on putting the values and the ideas of culture into practice. And we understand what we eat. And in Africa, food was and is central to life. It is not just something that they do. Your body is your temple. And there is a great concern about what you put in your temple. And the home remedies suggest that there is a holistic way of life of people. And Africans were herbologists. Many of us have old grandmothers or old uncles or whatever that always knew something about the herbs and could go into the backyard or go out into the woods and they could find the kind of herb that they needed in order to make you well. Today we have no insurance, we know nothing about herbs, and so we die. And music, when we say, what kind of songs did they sing? If I don't even get to that tonight, I want you to know that these old women, each one of them had a song that hit their soul. And somebody said, I knew when my mother was going through troubled waters because she would start hymning. And she started humming this tune. And it was a tune that she would just hum that seemed to just lift her out and bring her back to where she needed to be. Some of us could survive some of the onslaught if we just start humming a tune that really reached at our very inner fibers. So music is the life force. We know that by the music played today. That one of the things that they did for us, they took the drum away from us. When they took the drum away from us, they took the beat and that really sort of got very much at our inner being. So music is the life force of African society. One of my friends who did his dissertation in musicology says as he went back home, he was from Nigeria, he could not find any word in his culture for music. But there was music for death. There was music for birth. There was music for war. There was music for a wedding. Music was everywhere. And so that when all other fails, music connects us to the universal force, the divine force of becoming. And in these interviews, we wanted to find out how these various aspects of the culture were seen in the lives of older women as they raised their children. The average age of these women that we interviewed was 72, and the average age of their mothers, if they were living, would be 98. And many of the women that we interviewed were the youngest in their families, sort of the only living children of these parents, and so they could hook us into women that go back 100 years ago. And this is how some of them described their mothers. And I just run through them. Somebody said my mother was very smart. Somebody said she couldn't read nor write, but she was very smart. See, Harriet Tubman couldn't read nor write. But she was so intelligent that she could bring 300 people from South up to Maryland and never lost anybody. That's a genius. Somebody said my mother was the most beautiful woman in the world. So she was a fine woman. And what I say to my young adolescents is, can somebody say, that's a fine young woman? It's a fine woman. Somebody said she was the most beautiful woman in the world. She was a lovely, sweet, good mother. Somebody said she was reserved. She never raised a voice. So she was a sweet old lady. She was a good woman. Another person said she devoted her life to her children. And as we've gotten caught into somebody else's existential basis, we say, hey, that's using us. That's whatever. And I would not be standing here today if my mother had not devoted her life to me. She's the only person I know I could wake up 2 o'clock in the morning and say, I'm hungry, fix me some grits and eggs, and can you make me some biscuits? See, when you get into somebody else's way, it's like, I can't do that, you're using me. Somebody else said she was sacrificing. So she took care of us. She always, somebody said my mother had 9 children. And she always had time for each of us. Somebody else said she prepared us for life. And at another level, these women said we never went to bed hungry. These were poor children. When somebody said, although we were poor, I never remember going without something that we really needed. So what do they say about these values? What kind of values did they learn? And I'll just run through them. Each one of them we could write something about in terms of our training that we do with our young people, in terms of our therapy. First one, which I think is very basic to Maya, says be kind to others. Right. Treat people. Another value said, my mother worked hard. So she was a hard worker. She was a tireless worker. Another value said, education is important. I said this morning, get something in your head, they used to say, and then nobody can take it away from you. Another value said, be truthful, don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal. Another one, live a clean life, do the right thing. Somebody said there were some things that you just could not do. I mean, it was just not in the realm of possibilities that an African American child would do that. Another person said that my mother believed in God, went to church all day on Sunday. So she was a very spiritual person. So she was always praying. See, I'm not even sure that we as parents pray on our children enough. That when we don't know what to do, we just sit there and we pray to the creative force that they would come and guide this child. Sometimes we are so into this one where if you can't see it and we're so concrete in things that we have forgotten the spiritual dimension of life. So people said we had weekly prayer. We thank the Lord for just the little things that we got. So when we used to eat together at dinner, we all had to say a Bible verse. Somebody said, I never heard my mother complain. And I'm running into mothers in Newark, New Jersey, where I live, who sit down and complain to their 3- and 4-year-olds about how bad times are. What can your 3-year-old do? Can they get a job? Can they help you? So I never heard my mother complain. If she did any complaining, she would be complaining to her girlfriend. But you see, some of us have even gotten alienated from our sisters that we don't even have anybody to talk to, so we talk to our children as if they were adults. They can't solve our problems. We were given these children to solve their problems. So I never heard my mother complain. Somebody said, I never saw my mother cry. Didn't mean she didn't cry, but I never saw my mother cry. Somebody else said that she was a strict disciplinarian. You don't talk back to adults. Children are seen but not heard. Well, that's not a Western standard, because Westerns can say, you know, you're supposed to sit down. You know, you're supposed to negotiate with your children what you're going to do. You can't vote Democratic. Well, not these old sisters. So I told you to do what you're doing. Say, if you want to complain, complain to the wall. Don't tell me about it. So children didn't ask a lot of questions. Mother used to say, wait until you get to be an adult, have children, and then let them ask you some questions. Don't ask me. Somebody said, my mother didn't take any foolishness. So you go play with your friends. Because children are not our friends, they are children. Your girlfriend is your friend, you know, your buddy is your friend. But so many parents are concerned about being friends and your children liking you. So you waver. Yes, you can have this because you're trying to buy their love and all this other kind of stuff. No, you can't have it. Get a job. Somebody else said, my mother would scold me for the longest time for what I did. And I think a lot of times we let our children off the hook. They do something that's dreadfully wrong and we only talk to them about one time. This woman said, my mother would not let me live down what I did wrong. She would have me tell everybody that she saw, come here. Tell this lady what you just did yesterday. And so by the time you done talked to about 15 people, you would remember not to do that again. Because you didn't want to hear your mother's mouth. So you did what? I can't even believe it. 2 weeks later, she said, come here and tell me again what it was that you did. Scold me forever. Somebody else said, my mother used to maul my head, so she would just take her little fist and just like rub right into my head. And then you had another person, I had a mother used to pinch me. And some of you know about that switch. And I'm telling my young parents, you know, like don't ever, and these old people, they knew that. You can't hit a child with your hand because you don't know the force that you come with. You get a small little switch based on the age of that child. When they're real young, it's just something to fan them with. As you got to be a little bigger, hey. Got a little bigger, you go out and get something, and my mother would say, are you playing with me? You want me to go out there and get the switch? So the switch changed based on your age and your size. But I'm seeing these young mothers got belts and things of that type hitting these very young children because they don't know. Somebody else said my mother would not accept mediocrity. Always would say you can do better. So don't do anything halfway. So you can do better. Do your best. Somebody else said cleanliness is next to godliness. Woman said if your clothes were washed, and she used to wash by hand, and if they weren't clean, hanging on the line, your mother would come by and take them off the line, stop them in the dirt and say, go clean them, you're embarrassing me. Another person said that my mother used to sweep the dirt in the yard. Sweep, and it's not grass, sweep the dirt in the yard. Mother Valley said, yes, you are your brother's and your sister's keeper. The oldest was always responsible for the youngest. And if the youngest did something wrong, it would be the oldest who was punished. Respect yourself. Hold your head up high. Be proud of yourself. Be proud of what you have. Be true to yourself. Be strong. Another value said, respect others. It was most important that you respect your elders. One woman said, my mother would smack me down if I called an adult by their first name. So we had to say, yes, sir, and no, sir. I don't even know what kind of changes we could make in our children if we just had them to say, yes, sir, and no, sir, to the adults in their life. Brother Barry said, depend on yourself. Know how to take care of yourself. And know how to act in public. That's what I was saying to the students this morning. Don't embarrass me in public. You want to act crazy? You act crazy at home. When you get out in the public, act like you got some sense. And see, when you had those kinds of parents and you would try to embarrass them in public, then they would embarrass you. Take your pants down right there and beat you. They said, well, hey, you want to act out? Come on, let's act out. So what were some of these proverbs, and then I'm going to wrap up, but what were some of these proverbs that these women mentioned? And these proverbs, we understand, are the daughters of experience. And one woman who was born in 1877 said, to thine own self be true, then thou cannot be false to any other person. You know that one. You're known by the company that you keep. Oh, people say, were you with him? You'll be saying, well, I didn't do that. Or, my mama said, were you with her? If you were with them, then you were guilty. Some of it sounds like the Bible, do unto others as you would have them to do unto you. Treat people right. My mother used to say, you can speak to a dog. And if you can speak to a dog, surely you can speak to another human being. One that I like is that any frog is a fool if he does not praise his own pond. That's 1886. Any frog is a fool if he does not praise his own pond. When you eat someone else's food, you're putting their hands in your stomach. Fear is the beginning of wisdom. See, and some of our kids are gone before they can even learn fear. Fear Fear is the beginning of wisdom. Keep your hands in your pocket when you're doing something for someone. That means if you let me have $20, you don't have to go around and tell the world, I just let Lafrancis have $20. That's if you want me to have it. Keep your hand in your pocket when you're doing something for someone else. The bad road is wide and the good road is narrow. Any fool can walk a bad road. Don't take much. Can't get off of it. But the good road is narrow and it's hard to stay on the good road. Honesty is the best policy. When a rumor has walked a mile, truth has just put on her shoes. Be somebody. If you are somebody, everybody will respect you. I'm finding that's true about our culture. That when you put on your culture, people don't know what to do. I mean, it's just like awesome. It is so awesome. Every dog has his day, even if it's a rainy day. You reap what you sow. Anything not worth asking for is not worth having. That's like, don't steal, don't cheat. If you want it, ask me for it, don't take nothing from me. No matter what you have, you're no better than the next person. Everything is good for something, so these old people saved up everything. Always speak because it doesn't cost you anything. Somebody else said, my mother used to say, did I sleep with you last night? That meant like you got to speak in the morning, because if I didn't sleep with you, that meant you got to say good morning. Don't be a fool. Never skip out of school. A bird in your pocket is worth 10 in someone else's. 12 months in a year, you have 6 months to mind your own business, and the other 6 months to leave other people's business alone, and then the year is up. Everybody's business is nobody's business. Watch as well as pray. Don't let your shirt tail be like an umbrella. Fly up every time they push the right button. A day has but one eye. A night has 1,000. There's a number of home remedies, and the hour is late. Some of them past them, but some of us been eating some of these good old foods because we had good food this evening, and we know some of those foods that these old ladies cooked. And as I said earlier, they took leftovers, they took scrap, they took people's throwaways, they took spare ribs that had been thrown away, and they made a whole meal out of it. They took neck bones. If you're old enough, you might remember chicken feet. I mean, things that nobody wanted, and created a whole way of eating and cooking. But I want to end with some of the songs that they used to sing. When they weren't, spirit needed to be uplifted, these women would sing these songs, and some of these songs would throw out the lifeline. Precious Lord, Lord, I'm coming home. One of the very favorite was Amazing Grace, and another favorite was Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. And then What a Fellowship, Steal Away, Go Down Moses, I Will Trust in the Lord, Old Time Religion, God Will Take Care of You, and the Sweet By and By. Mary McLeod Bethune's favorite song was This Little Light of Mine. His Eye is on the Sparrow, Nearer the Cross, and I Must Tell Jesus. And so what I suggest that we do, and I've been trying to like hook up the actual values with some of the values from out of the book of Coming Forth by Day. But what must we do? I say we must stretch beyond the narrow confines of Western society. We must take our healing practice beyond this sort of either-or analysis of Western society. We must practice holistic healing. The spiritual is not separated from the political. nor from the economic or anything else. They all must be combined, and we need to bring African behavior into our own lives. We must practice this whole thing of Mayat. We must practice truth, justice, and righteousness. We must treat people right. We must raise our children from the value perspectives of our foremothers and know that they are still connected to this ancient Kemet ancestors of ours, and that the hour is late, the time is now, and your mother is calling you. Thank you.
I can. I can if they want to. Drink me a little water here. Thank you. You're taping it. Yes, they did.
We don't have a question and answer period on the lecture.
We would like to thank the Bay Area Association, Black Technologists, and the East Tornado Council.
Also, the Heart Failure Federation of Kids Report, the Afro-Centric Lab of the 11, which consists of Alpha, Dr. Wade Noble, and Augustine, the staff, administration, and the Common High School, staff, administration, the Muhammad Exam, some of the wonderful performance, and also Dr. Rose, for her introduction. And I like to give another round of applause.
You can walk over and I can help you.
Okay. You ready for the questions? Great.
I'd like to thank everyone else for coming, the administrators, the staff, the students, my family, everybody. Most of all, I'd like to thank you for thank you, Mr. Barnett, and everybody that's together. This is big for me because I'm speaking pregnant.
All right, go ahead. She did good too. She did good. How did she say? Some questions, answers.
Purchase the Francis book in 128 for the benefit of his person.
Okay, let's see if we have any questions.
At this time, we'd like to entertain any questions that you may have for Dr. Lafrancis. Any questions?
Wow. Please. Yes, thank you. You know, and the question was if I was still collecting data. The young lady said her grandmother is 98 years old. The other thing is that, you know, our elders are just slowly passing on. And if you got these older men and women in your family, you need to interview them. Because so much of our history is right there. And we're letting, I know I looked at my grandmother, and you know how you think they're going to just be here, and then like one day they're gone, and things that she knew, because her mother would have been about 100 and maybe 20 years old, because she was 90-something when she died. We don't know. So, I mean, this kind of a thing is something that we each should do for our own individual families. There's a, yes. Mm-hmm. long it's been since 87. It's coming. You know, with women, you know, we got about 50 other things we're doing, you know, and all of that. But I really do want to write this up. I would love to write up the interviews just the way they were given to me, and then sort of put this introduction that I've been doing on it so that you can just hear these women from their own voices. So yes, I do plan to do this as a book under the title Return to the Source, the Wisdom of Our Foremothers. Yes. I saw another question. Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering, we seem to be victims of the system because we're constrained by the leaders. And one of the things that's happened that I've become aware of is that since Spock, the laws changed in such a way to constrain the behavior of parents from doing some of the things that the parents did early on in our development. What advice do you give to parents, young parents, of circumventing that reality?
Well, obviously, a part of this is a retraining and a socialization. I really don't think that other people know better how to raise our children than we know ourselves. And so what's happening is that a lot of people are coming into our own space and telling us how to raise our children. I think that if you are really grounded in your own culture, you have to stand on that. And some of the abuse that's happening to our children is because these young parents do not know how to socialize their children. And that is this whole physical thing of like hitting somebody with your hand or hitting somebody with a belt is sure more devastating than the switch that we were talking about. But at the same time, I know mothers today who say, well, listen, let me take you to DIFAS. In New Jersey, it's the Division of Youth and Family Services. Let me take you to DIFAS because first let me do what I'm going to do. We can't let our children threaten us by, if you do this, I'm going to call DIFAS. But I mean, if you're grounded and you know that what you're doing is out of a love and a commitment to see the children raised to be whole, then you stand on those grounds. Yes.
The spirituality of the church is so strong in the community, and to build upon that as well as interrelating that with the community of the school so that they can thrive together and redevelop the community accordingly. What ways can you see that working in perhaps in Newark and through your observations of other places?
Well, you know, I think the church can do much more than what it is presently doing. Historically, the church has been the center of the African American community. And just about everything came out of the church. A lot of churches today, I know, I can't say about Oakland, but I know a lot of areas, the church nowadays is just open on Sundays. And if you are a member of a church, it seems to me that you've got to insist that the church is open possibly 7 days a week, doing things for the community. Obviously, the churches that are in this neighborhood can become extensions of this school in terms of some of the parents and things becoming a part of this. There's so many things. But if we do not hold our ministers accountable beyond Sunday morning, they're just going to do Sunday morning. So we've got to do this link up. Some of the things in terms of training our young people. If the church was doing some of those things. I know when I was growing up, my mother worked all kinds of jobs. But in the summer, the pastors evidently got together and they would do what was called Bible school in the summer. But they would set up that schedule so that there was no conflict. And so that every 2 weeks, a different church would be doing this 2-week Bible, and so that my sister and I was able to go the whole summer to various Bible schools without ever having to have this babysitter because these churches had done that. But obviously we need to bring back the church's community involvement. And I think the people who can do that are people who belong to these churches and who insist that they do this. Yes?
I'm one of the doctors here at Columbus High School, and I would like to know how can we as faculty shift the mind of the young ladies who are in the school today back to their central role in the African society. Because so many women today don't see themselves as the center. They feel that they are defined and controlled by.
It's not easy. It's not easy. Because you see, we are so bombarded with a different kind of a perspective on the realities of women and what women ought to do. So one of the things that my group, the International Black Women's Congress, does is that we've got a rites of passage program. We can only touch so many girls, so I mean, we need as many rites of passage programs as we possibly can get, because every girl ought to be under some leadership women development training. It's in those on a consistent basis every week, 2-3 times a week, that you see these girls, that you begin to tell them about what you know and what other women know in terms of how you should act and how you should behave. So that is one small thing. Obviously, what we're finding is that the mothers of these girls are also young. They're like 27, 28, 29 years old. So some of them also need rites of passage training. So we can't just do the girls, we also have to do their mothers. Schools could reach out to do some of these things, but it also means that, you know, you might not be under your contract. And a lot of teachers aren't doing things unless it's written into their contract. And so that means that that part that we could be using, teachers in their knowledge in terms of helping beyond the confounds of 8:30 to 2:45 or something, we don't have. Could probably bring more parents into the schools. You know, I mean, I know in a lot of schools parents don't feel like they're welcome, but I know that's not true in this school, because I know the kinds of changes that you're trying to bring about. But more parents walk in these halls so that the kids know that on any one day there's going to be like 10 parents walking around in here. There's things that children will not do when they know that their mothers and their fathers, their aunts and their grandparents are going to be here. That can change some of the behavior, and just sort of analyzing some of these videos that these girls are watching and explaining to them that this cannot be a description of you, but it's a commitment, and it's little by little. But as long as you continue to persist, it might take you not this generation of students, but the next generation before you really begin to see some changes. But at some point, students will know that this is the way you behave in this school. These are the things that the people in this school believe in, and you can have an impact. But it's not an easy fix. It takes a great commitment. You see, I'm going to take 3 more questions. I see 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to go, yes, young man. Okay, put the light in. You know, I think a lot of the discussion about the women's movement has been sort of an intellectual discussion about women's issues by a very limited number of women. I mean, and if you read some of their literature, this is constantly being said. I don't know the extent to which the women's movement has impacted the vast majority of white women in this country. So I think that African American women have always been on the peripheral of the women's movement. I think that if we looked at what has caused the kind of break in male-female relationships in this country and family life in this country, I would much rather put the blame on Daniel Patrick Moynihan and his Moynihan report that came out in 1965. I think that publication and the policy implications of that had more devastating effect on the African American community than anything that has been done in the 20th century. And he gained so much notoriety out of that book that he's become now the senior senator from the state of New York and one of the most powerful people in the United States Senate. Nobody ever heard of him until he talked about our mothers, called us domineering and aggressive, said that the reason that the black man was in the position that he was in was because the black woman had castrated him, etc. And I think we brought more of Moynihan stuff than we brought of anything else. I think that the women's movement has always been peripheral. I mean, you might talk about the women's movement sort of riding on a coattail of the black liberation struggle in the 60s, but a lot of people rode on our coattails. And a lot of people gained benefit from the black movement than us ourselves. You know, I think that's one kind of a discussion, but I don't know that the women's movement in and of itself has changed our ideas about relationships. I think there's been a number of other kinds of negative definitions about males and females and our internalizing that has had an impact on us, that we have sort of like given up on us because they are sort of ready definitions of why a black man ain't this and a black woman ain't this, and we bought that. And next thing you know, we write it in our novels. And next thing you know, we're waiting to exhale. And I'm not saying that some of these are not good novels, but that's what they are. They're novels. They're literature, excellent pieces of literature. But people read those things and take them as if they were real and go on then and to define other people as if they were real. So we're at a situation now where only about 46% of all black families are two-parent families. So obviously, we are in a crisis, and we've got to figure out how we can come back together as black men and women. And these men are not all in jail. I mean, 42% of all black men who are not incarcerated are either single, never married, widowed, separated, divorced. It's a bunch of them out there. So we got a job to do. Question just behind the young lady, yes.
I wanted to know, in your travels and what you do studying about black people, have you find it's been more theoretical than reality? Because I hear so many different types of individuals speaking about such different things that have no knowledge. It's more or less like it's a theory of living rather than a reality of living. And the other part of our question is, when will you do that?
But now, when you say it's a theory, what scholars are you talking about that's more theory than practice?
In our educational system now, I don't know if you've heard about the controversy we're having now about our children not knowing the Holocaust and so on. And it's more or less like we're teaching a theory rather than a reality of what this is. And it seems like we're living a theory rather than a reality.
Well, see, that, you know, the African scholar that I was saying, Theophile Obanga, in his book, his main thing about Western society is that Western society is more sort of intellectual, theoretical than it is of pragmatism, of actually doing this thing. And one of the things I think about looking at the lives of older black women is like, what did they do? Some of these women didn't have no long conversation with you, but you could see in their everyday life what they were doing. And so it is obvious that theory sort of guides our life, but we must act. So that if we want our children to learn, we must do. It's not sitting down making a whole lot of theoretical discussions about intellectually how one learns. If you want a child to learn how to read, you must put the time in to teach that child how to learn how to read. So just doing a test and getting a test score to say that this child is at some percentile, it does not mean that child cannot learn how to read. It means that you just got to take more time to teach that child how to read, which means you got to roll up your sleeves and you got to do the work. And it is much easier to do the theory than it is to do the work. But if each one of us only did a little bit each day, don't have to do a whole lot. If we just gave our children 1 hour of quality time a day, and I don't mean our biological children, I mean African American children. I mean, if you wanted a tutorial to go forth for our children, we were talking today about the fact that our children need systematic study on how to pass that SAT. We know that other people do that. We know that other people start doing it when the kids are in the 7th and 8th grade, getting them prepared to take it when they're junior and getting prepared to take it when they're a senior. It's easy. We just have to get one person who says, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to make sure that the kids who come out of this school is prepared to take the SAT. So it's a matter of doing. And we have been doers. And that's what we need to do again. We need to turn our attention to doing what we know we have to do. And it's hard work. Got one question here, and then I'm coming here. Yes. Okay. That's a good question. I'm not too sure. I can easily give you the questions. Black sociologists, I'm not sure. It just depends. I just quit all my jobs and things, so I'm not sure. The ancestors is going to make all things come possible. But I'm really putting a lot of energy in trying to get the International Black Women's Congress going, because there's a lot of work that we as women can be doing for ourselves and for our families. And so and then for me to do that, I've just got to concentrate all of my energies on that. So whether or not I'll be able to come in October, I'm not absolutely sure, but you know, I'm a past president of that organization, and I have a great commitment to that organization. So what I can do, I'm very, very willing to do, but I can give you the questions. We can do that afterward. And the last question belongs to the sister here.
First of all, I want to continue and say that I'm just a little nervous because the speech is so dynamic.
Thank you.
You're the second sister I heard speak. I heard Colin Muhammad speak, a whole bunch of different men. But you're the second sister besides the told you've actually spoken on truth.
All right.
People not being far left or far right, but just far straight on the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to say, as a young 22-year-old independent producer,
all right.
Communication company, that young people are really listening to what you have to say. They really are. They listen to you through the rap music. I mean, not you per se, but your message. It's like when I hear Chuck D and Soldier and Farside and all these other dudes, they speak. They're really listening to the ancestors or to the elders. They really are listening. So we're really going to get the job done, but we are really in tune with you. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.